Story, International Retaliations Overview, T'Challa, the Black Panther draws closer to regaining leadership of Wakanda when the country declares war on the being Damo. And his wife Ororo Storm returns. Chapter 1 T'Challa entered his lonely new house after 2 weeks of hunting a human trafficking syndicate. The hunt had culminated when the syndicate's boss ordered the dumping of their last pickup. T'Challa had felt a chill when the syndicate's boss had confessed the last act, therefore, he burned out his jet's engine to reach the trafficking ship in time. The people were men, women, and children either kidnapped or coerced into the hands of the traffickers. The victims were sustained in a gold-yellow solution in tanks for the purpose of being sold as lab rats to the likes of T'Challa's last enemy Dr. M'Basi. The authorities arrived afterwards to clean up the mess T'Challa had made with the boat's crew who he had not killed since lethal force was a final resort. There was a moment that he would hold dear. A girl who was one of the prisoners had told him thank you. T'Challa's perspective of his purpose was put into place. When the girl expressed her gratitude, the world still needed his alter ego the Black Panther and not only Wakanda. His thoughts shifted to his stepmother Ramonda, who lived in South Africa since he had been in the country for 2 days and did not have time to speak to her. She sent him presents on birthdays and he sent her a present every month in a hefty allowance. However, the money would never repay the debt of her raising him after his mother had died in childbirth. Whenever he thought about his mother's, the next thought would be about his deceased father T'Chaka, the former king of Wakanda. T'Challa stood at attention in front the regal picture of his father. T'Challa had inherited the brown eyes, flat nose, and broad chin. And he had also inherited the kingdom Wakanda at 13 years old after his father was killed by a would-be invader. He still was embittered after the 22 years since he lost his father. His father had imparted a lot and often said that Wakanda was special because its people used their gifts, that vibranium may have made them isolated but they were still a part of the human family, and it was the king's duty not to rule but serve the people by protecting them. Sometimes T'Challa questioned if having ended the monarchy and given Wakanda over to a democratic government would have pleased his father and ancestors. I made the best decision possible, thought T'Challa. The phone rang and he answered it with anticipation. Beloved, said Ororo. T'Challa smiled because of his wife's voice. He had not been able to touch her for months since she had gone away on business with the X-Men. Sweetheart. I just came in, said T'Challa. Ororo's image appeared on the phone monitor. She was an ebony woman, with blonde hair, blue eyes, and straight nose. Her delicate beauty betrayed the harshness of her life as a mutant with the responsibilities of bridging humans and mutant kind. Good news, I will be joining you today, said Ororo joyfully. The image blurred and disappeared. Ororo, said T'Challa. The screen and the phone became dead. T'Challa's heightened senses went wild. There was something wrong. It was not in the house but outside. The sky dazzled in a multiple of colors and the colors poured through the windows of the house and painted the floors and walls. Then the world turned to pitch black and T'Challa's night vision was turned on. He made his way to the balcony, and the entire world was enveloped in blackness. The tall tawny trees and the farm plains were obscured. Also there was a to and fro motion. Slowly the darkness retreated. The world became colorful and the quick change hurt T'Challa's eyes so he squinted. When he opened them, everything was normal. But it was not. The sky was a blue illuminated dome. Suddenly the world returned to blackness, then the colorful lights and back to pure daylight. The dome was no longer there. Ororo, he said and darted to the phone that rang. Something just happened here, he said as answered the phone. Hello sir, said a woman in a thick Wakanda accent. Yes, who is this? I am a National Disaster and Emergency Operations Officer, calling to see if you and your household are all right after the experiment, said the woman. What experiment? Asked T'Challa. The one just concluded, sir. We sent out pamphlets and, hold on, I was out of the country for the last 2 weeks, said T'Challa. Sorry, sir. The president is presently on the television speaking about the experiment. He commanded the television to turn on. A beep on the phone line indicated that there was an incoming call. Ororo, he thought. I am hanging up now, said T'Challa, and he took the next call. What went wrong? Asked Ororo. There was a experiment done on the country, answered T'Challa. Well, what kind of experiment? Asked Ororo. I don't know. Achebe is addressing the nation as we speak, answered T'Challa, and continued, I will direct the feed to you. The feed from the television was sent to Ororo over the comm phone after 2 command words from T'Challa. President Achebe was a big man in his late 50s and the first president of Wakanda. T'Challa had handed power over Achebe in a ceremony after the first ever national elections and had accepted the people's choice, whom he considered a firm leader. My fellow Wakandans, said Achebe, and continued, I thank you for your patience in the test just concluded, and by all reports it was successful. We as a people have come a long way to reach this stage in our development. We face numerous threats from outside our borders because of the vibranium we are blessed with, therefore we must ensure the safety of our state from those who would seek to destroy us. Therefore, for 5 minutes we were able to move every square inch of Wakanda from this world into another dimension. It is my hope that we will not have to resort to such a measure in the future, but if the need does present itself, just be assured that you will be safe. Officers from the National Disaster and Emergency Operations will come to meet you and provide any assistance. Again I thank you, my fellow Wakandans. T'Challa was amazed. The whole of Wakanda sent to another dimension, he thought. The buzzer from the front gate sounded. He went to his security console and saw his longtime friend Taku. T'Challa, I need to speak with you urgently. It is a matter of life and death, said Taku. T'Challa opened the gate. Ororo, he said. I heard and I will try to reach as quickly as I can. I love you, said Ororo and hung up. Chapter 2. Taku was 5 years older than T'Challa and was the former king's right-hand man, especially in the defense system for Wakanda. Taku was burly, medium height, and moved in quick time steps. But he ran instead of walked to T'Challa's house that was surrounded by farmland and baked in the heat. Why aren't you at the canopy? Thought T'Challa as he waited by the door for his friend. T'Challa, said Taku breathlessly and continued, Wakanda is in grave danger. Come inside and catch your breath, said T'Challa. Taku wasted little time as he placed his laptop computer on the table and brought up a program. The experiment triggered something in the Haven dimension, said Taku. This program shows how the signals from the Haven dimension have increased since the experiment. Slow down, said T'Challa and continued, when did they find this Haven dimension? Right after you left office. The military moved into the King Solomon mines and began experiments on the items found there, answered Taku. That was the special project assigned to you, quizzed T'Challa. He had hoped that King Solomon's mines would have remained off limits. Yes. Right at the start we discovered that the caverns were not King Solomon's mines, as your friend the Collector had thought. Rather it was a base of operations for a non-human species, answered Taku and continued. The giant diamond is an immense power source and was used to power the dimensional shift today. And we found coordinates for the Haven dimension in the base, and the rest was our know-how. We constructed a bubble inside the Haven to hold Wakanda, but is big enough to hold larger objects. I for one know the dangers of dimensional travel. How would you have known if Wakanda was returned to the correct dimension, place, and time? Asked T'Challa. We placed beacons on 2 New York Maya battle cruisers and sent them to the Indian Ocean. They would have indicated if Wakanda was returned to the right place, answered Taku, but we have awakened something in the process. Something like what? Asked T'Challa. Meanwhile, on the outskirts of Central City was the massive construction known as the canopy. The canopy acted as a shell that protected the technological animal beneath it from spy satellites. The technological animal functioned as Wakanda's defense research facility and housed the machine termed the Hider that transported Wakanda to the Haven dimension. Deep within the facility there were rooms designed for the head of state operations. And the president made full use of the rooms. He delivered his speech from the communications room and afterwards took a call from several concerned world power leaders. He had allayed their fears that the Wakanda's new technology could enter the wrong hands. In fact, the world leaders wanted a quick meeting to discuss the new technology. They are afraid that we are now the ultimate power on Earth, thought Achebe, as he reflected on the conversations with the heads of states of the other world powers and continued, everything is in our favor. The economy is stable and we are protected. Everything is on schedule as I planned it for this great country. Mr. President, said Ebo. Ebo was the president's chief advisor and friend. He was feared professionally by his peers and subordinates because of his political reach. Yes, said Achebe. What is it? Ebo stood across from the president who sat at his desk in the command room. How did it go? Asked Ebo. I was asked if we could remove a country other than our own from the face of the earth and I answered if need be, said Achebe, so they want to discuss the issue as a matter of international security. We have seen increased activities from their embassies, said Ebo. Achebe did not let the change in his friend's tone slide pass. There is something else, asked Achebe. A foreign operative unit has been spotted on their way to this vicinity. We believe that they are spies. The military wants orders, answered Ebo. Achebe knew what had to be done. There will be retaliations from their country, said Achebe. The military has my consent to use non-lethal means. Thank you, Mr. President, said Ebo, and he departed. 6 minutes later, the Hunter branch received their go orders. Commandos in the branch wore masked full-bodied white vibranium microwave suits that protected them against injuries from bullets, laser fire, high falls, explosions, and gave invisibility. They were the only branch sanctioned by the military to use vibranium full-body armor. Therefore, they had a high status in military ranks and exclusivity. The operation to stop the spy unit was termed catch and release. The attack was swift and the targets were caught unawares. The resistance from the targets was overwhelmed by the hunters' superior arms and fighting skills. The captured spy unit had many spy planes that could become invisible but had not been activated and those were destroyed. The spy unit was released without detention. Chapter 3: A lioness that lay in the high grass saw when Ororo arrived in the X-Men two-seat plane and landed inside the fenced compound. Less than a minute later, Ororo and T'Challa embraced as though the lovers never wanted to release each other. Taku was taken aback and thought about his love interest Njinga. Their relationship was up in the air since he was let go by government for interference in the Safe Haven project. It was Njinga who made Taku aware of the Nest's prisoner Darkheart's rambles that led to Taku's suspicion about the Haven dimension. Ororo and T'Challa finally separated and she then greeted Taku warmly. T'Challa retold Taku's story to his wife. T'Challa call Achebe. Try to convince him about this, said Ororo. T'Challa had a dedicated number for the Achebe. Meanwhile, Ororo glanced over the new house as she went to drop her luggage. She heard her husband as he persuaded Achebe to listen to the fears of Taku. Ororo did not know much about Achebe. She had met the president briefly at a function and found him to have the potential to lead Wakanda on the road envisioned by her husband. Even she was shocked when T'Challa decided to end the kingship of Wakanda. And it was not about him being tired of ruling the land. The decision was in the best interest of the nation in light of what was expected to come. Achebe, don't be stubborn, said T'Challa loudly. Achebe had hung up on T'Challa. Taku, I want to speak with Darkheart. Could you arrange it? Asked T'Challa. I will call Njinga, said Taku. While Taku made the call, T'Challa found his wife and embraced her. This is not how expected your return would be, said T'Challa. This is normal for us, said Ororo, and she smiled. Still, I am going to make up for it, said T'Challa. Taku interrupted the moment. Njinga said yes, Taku said. The nest is a 2-hour drive from here, T'Challa said. We can fly then, said Ororo. Taku, go with her and I will use my plane, said T'Challa. The nest was on a savanna. Rhinos and leopards usually came close to the high walls but were scared away by the alarm of a sensor. Inside the high walls was a prison designed for a special prisoner who came to destroy Wakanda in retaliation for defeat at the hands of T'Challa, when he was king. The prisoner was Darkheart, a dimensional drifter. His thin pale body was bounded to a metal chair and observation tubes forced into his flesh. A computer crown was on his head and it regulated his brainwaves since he was telepathic. Njinga was in charge on the prisoner, and her duties were to extract credible and useful information from him about the dimensions. 4 weeks ago, Darkheart revealed that an entity had regained contact with him. After coercion, Darkheart confessed that while he was free he often meditated and his consciousness would travel to places he never knew existed in the interdimensions. On one such journey his consciousness encountered an entity of a higher intelligence. The entity was in a state of hibernation and its consciousness also roamed. The new communications had come about because the entity was being disturbed. The entity referred to itself as Demo. At the canopy, President Achebe called Ebo to the command room. T'Challa wants me to stop the project, Achebe said with disdain. On what grounds? Asked Ebo. His friend Taku believes that the noises in the Haven dimension are warnings, said Achebe. The scientists passed those noises as being in keeping with dimensional anomalies, said Ebo. And another thing. His wife is back. A couple of fighters escorted her into our airspace. I did not know she had an air clearance number. Is that something she retained after being queen? Maybe. I do not have a list of the luxuries that she gave up, said Achebe. Still, Ebo said, since we are on alert, should she not be treated in theory as an internal threat? Since T'Challa opposes you on the Haven matter, he may influence his wife to use her abilities against us. Achebe took a moment to reflect on the comment. What do you have in mind? Asked Achebe. A nano bullet that would suppress her mutant powers up to 10 hours. No, said Achebe, completely out of the question. She is a civilian and I doubt that T'Challa would use her. He would rather face me man to man on this issue. As a matter of fact, I expect to see him shortly, but I don't have the time for his debate. I have to respond to the impending call from the country who operatives we mishandled. They are probably analyzing and plotting, said Ebo. The whole world must doing that right now, said Achebe. Not everyone. MEDA's president has issued a statement praising our initiative and wanted us to continue sticking it to the world imperialists, said Ebo and chuckled. That fellow. The man is a revolutionist groupie. Wakanda has fought imperialism for over 1,000 years. And we will not become an imperial nation under my stewardship, said Achebe. Ebo's mobile phone designated for his family rang. "Excuse me, Mr. President," said Ibo, "I have to speak with my daughter." "Tell her hello for me," said Achebe. Ibo exited the room and he met in the corridor the 10 hunter guards posted to protect the president. "Sweetheart," Ibo said as he left the corridor. "Daddy, I need for you come to the nest," said Njinga. "We are in middle of an international dilemma here." "What is so important?" asked Ibo. "I cannot discuss it over the phone," said Njinga. "Is it Taku?" asked Ibo. "Please Daddy, I need to show you something and only you." "I can't trust anyone else," said Njinga. Ibo glanced at his watch. 5 minutes, Ibo said. "Thank you," said Njinga, and she ended the call. Unknown to Ibo was that Damo's consciousness had taken over Darkheart's mind and during routine interrogation had bypassed the crown and invaded Njinga's mind. The nest was a short trip from the canopy in the sky military transport that carried Ibo to the facility. The nest was a relatively small compound. Security was done by average-height blue bipedal robots armed with mini nano-cannons. Anyone who entered the facility needed a hard hat that was a computerized external neural inhibitor. Ibo was escorted through a private route by 2 robots to the holding area center. Njinga was there alone and she ordered the escorts to leave. She was a lovely petite woman in a short lab coat. "What was so urgent?" asked Ibo. Chapter 4. As soon as Ibo's transport departed for the canopy, 2 small aircraft landed on the nest facility's grounds. Taku used his security clearances to bypass the guards as he led T'Challa and Ororo to the holding area center where they came across an unconscious Njinga. "Njinga!" shouted Taku and tried to revive her as he clumsily removed the neural inhibitor. "There is still a fresh scent of someone else who was here," T'Challa said. "Taku, find out who was here earlier," said Ororo. "I will see what I can do for her." Taku reluctantly released Njinga. "I will check on Darkheart," said T'Challa. The cell was nearby and inside T'Challa found the corpse of Darkheart in the metal chair. Vapors rose slowly from the crown's burnt circuits. How did his consciousness become so powerful, thought T'Challa. He returned quickly to the area center where Taku had rushed back. "Her father. Presidential advisor Ibo was here minutes before we came," said Taku. "Why would he do this to her?" "He did not. Look at her pupils, they have been dilated. I have seen this in people who've been taken over and the parasite had jumped to a new host, plus the neutralizer has been short-circuited," said Ororo, and she continued, "Most likely her father is the new host." "I will call Achebe," said T'Challa as he took out his mobile phone. "Where would Ibo be?" asked Ororo. "At the canopy with the president," replied Taku. Achebe did not answer and T'Challa could no longer wait. Additionally, he thought that no one else at that time would believe that Ibo was taken over. "Let's go then," said T'Challa. "I will stay with her," said Taku. The robots replaced his friends in the room as an alarm was raised. T'Challa and Ororo hurried to their respective planes and Ororo followed T'Challa once they were in the air. Meanwhile, the transport from the nest entered the canopy and stopped on the eastern side. Damo was delighted at the level of technological sophistication that the Wakandans had achieved since he had last seen the people. He had killed Darkheart because the man had tried to destroy Wakanda. But the woman was spared since she was not a threat and she had given Damo information that interested him. His base in the mountain had been taken over by the Wakandans. He had used the base as a headquarters while he explored the then new world. He had hoarded a huge amount of human wealth in the base for whenever he ventured into the world disguised as man of influence. Damo did not want any information from the leader of Wakanda. Instead, Damo wanted to kill him. With the leader gone, Damo could fulfill the first part of his plan. T'Challa and by extension Ororo were permitted because the president had expected the visit. T'Challa and Ororo hurriedly entered the defense facility. "What do you think his plan is?" asked Ororo. "Domination, revenge, and chaos," answered T'Challa. "The usual nonsense," said Ororo. The couple used an elevator that took them to the presidential area. They existed quickly and T'Challa caught Ebo's scent. "We have to pick up the pace," he said. The scent went to the command room. A hunter guard stopped the couple. "The president is expecting us," said T'Challa. "I was following procedure." "By all means proceed," said the guard. T'Challa and Ororo covered the corridor in seconds and T'Challa pushed open the command room door. Damo had not killed Achebe, but toyed with the man before the act. "T'Challa," said Achebe. "Ororo hit that one," shouted T'Challa as he pointed out Ebo. Ororo aimed her right hand at Ebo and an electrical bolt fired from her hand. Achebe watched in horror as his friend was propelled in the air and slammed against the wall. "It can't be," thought Achebe. T'Challa removed a traditional spear from a casing, flipped across the room and rested the shaft against Ebo to restrain him. The hunters entered the room and immediately took away the president. "Another group of hunters tried to reach Ebo. Keep back," said Ororo, and she created a strong wind from her hands that halted the hunters' advancement. "It's over, Darkheart," said T'Challa. "I am not Darkheart. The name is Damo," said Ebo. Ebo forced the shaft from his body with one hand and he held T'Challa by the throat with the other hand that tightened. T'Challa broke Ebo's nose with two quick and hard strikes with the bottom of his left hand. Damo could not fight in an injured body. He flung T'Challa away and then he tried to locate Achebe, but the president had been taken. T'Challa landed on his feet and prepared to pounce on Ebo. Damo realized from Ebo's memories that there was a hidden doorway behind him and he opened it. "Ororo!" shouted T'Challa as he dived after Ebo. Ororo pushed the hunters further back and she leapt into the hidden passage as the door almost closed. Damo had another part of his plan that involved the hider machine. He exited the passageway and ran into regular security. "Stop, T'Challa!" he shouted. And he went into an elevator and commanded it to take him to level the machine was on. T'Challa heard the guns that were cocked by the security officers, and he prepared himself for a quick fight. T'Challa shot out from the passage. He snatched the gun from the first guard, swiveled on his right heel and struck the second guard across the face with the left heel. A bullet fired into the passage and ricocheted near to Ororo's head as she fought against her claustrophobia. T'Challa struck the first guard in the throat and elbowed hard the second guard in the side of the head. Both guards fell haplessly to the floor. "Where would he have gone?" asked Ororo as she came out the tunnel. T'Challa looked at the elevator levels. The elevator descended. "He took the elevator," replied T'Challa. Ororo removed a radio from a guard as T'Challa pried the elevator doors open. Ororo understood his plan, and she entered the shaft and used her flight ability. T'Challa held onto Ororo, as she used her ability to generate a whirlwind to support the additional weight. They flew after the elevator that Damo was inside of. Damo exited the elevator and met a guard who was promptly disarmed and shot with the gun. Damo shot all he came upon until he met the scientists who controlled the machine. After he seized the chief scientist, he shot the rest. Damo removed the scientist's spectacles, made the man stare directly into his eyes, and he transferred himself into the new host. Ebo's unconscious body collapsed. Damo activated the machine and commanded it to self-teleport to his ship in the Haven dimension. The machine consisted of two rectangular 15 feet tall gray pillars, and a giant diamond-like object was in the middle of the pillars. 2 rooms away, T'Challa opened the elevator door and came upon the gruesome sight of the fallen. "My word," said Ororo. The wounded groaned. "I will help them," said Ororo. T'Challa raced towards where he heard the noise of the machine. But it was too late. A scientist and a machine dematerialized. As T'Challa returned to Ororo, he came across Ebo's body. "It changed hosts," thought T'Challa. "I called security and told them to bring medical assistance," said Ororo. "What happened?" "He got away with the machine. But it was not Darkheart. This thing called itself Damo, and I have a hunch the totems know about him." "We have to go to the vault," said T'Challa. The security officers spoke over the radio frequency and they were almost near. "Being captured will slow us down," thought T'Challa. T'Challa scanned the layout of the area. Machines had been moved and replaced, but it was basically the same place he had designed all those years ago. Then he found the wall that hid the passage he had built to lead him out of the labyrinth. He lifted the monitor's station and dragged it away from the wall. "Blast that wall, dear," said T'Challa. Ororo struck the wall with a volley of lightning bolts until an opening was made that she and her husband entered. Chapter 5. Achebe was infuriated at first, but he became calm. He ordered the arrest of T'Challa and his wife. As for Ororo, she was to be shot with nano rounds. Naya came to assist him. She was dependable and someone Achebe needed in the absence of Ebo. She was shocked that T'Challa and his wife would attack Ebo since it was out of character. Her thoughts were interrupted by the president's sudden outburst. He was on the phone with the security chief. "What?" said Achebe and continued, "The machine is missing. Ebo shot the scientists. Keep me posted. This is the out-of-control crisis that has to be pulled back." "Pull this off," thought Naya. "Where is Ebo now?" asked Naya. "In custody and unconscious. He had returned from a visit to his daughter and she was found unconscious. T'Challa, his wife, and another man were there." "I believe that the next man was Taku," replied Achebe. "I will find him," said Naya. "He is separated from T'Challa and Ororo, so he will not be difficult to capture." "Do it," said Achebe. "You are my chief advisor for this period. I will inform the staff." Taku was apprehended at the Nest's infirmary without an explanation given for why he had to leave his lover's side. So he fought with the human officer and had to be subdued by other human officers. Meanwhile, a sharpshooter was ordered to position himself near to the 2 planes that T'Challa and company came in. Inside the tunnel, T'Challa and Ororo used their night vision ability while he held her hand as they ran. Eventually the tunnel came to a dead end. There was a ladder that went upwards. T'Challa was not sure if anything rested on the cover at the top of the ladder. Still he climbed the ladder with Ororo close behind him. Luckily there was little weight on the cover and T'Challa pushed it up easily. He emerged on the field where the planes were. The planes were nearby, but security was in the process of cordoning the area. "We have to fight," he whispered to his wife. The sharpshooter surveyed the field and spotted a man as he came out the ground and bolted towards the plane. A woman came out of the ground after the man. She had long white hair as in the description. The sharpshooter cocked the rifle and aimed the weapon at the woman. He inhaled deeply and exhaled as he squeezed the trigger all the way back in the trigger guard. T'Challa paused after he heard a shot from a rifle. He spun around with the intent of telling Ororo to get down. Ororo fell in mid-stride. The sharpshooter tried to pick up through the scope the second target, T'Challa, but the man was gone. Then he spotted the target's head between the planes, but it vanished afterwards. T'Challa had never ran so fast in life. He had taken up Ororo, taken out the security officers near the plane and hid between the planes so the shooter had no clear shot. He breathed hard. Aurora was conscious the whole time. Yet she felt strange, like a part of her had been taken away. T'Challa removed the bullet that had attached to her neck. The head of the bullet had 4 prongs and in the center a needle. "A nano bullet," thought a relieved T'Challa. "You will be all right." "Just powerless for a while," he said and kissed her forehead. "We have to keep moving," said Aurora. A bullet ricocheted on the side of T'Challa's plane. "I have a plan," said T'Challa. He had a remote control for his plane. He commanded the plane to levitate and turn 360 degrees. As the plane did as instructed, Aurora slipped into the cockpit of her plane and T'Challa went into the passenger seat that was behind. Aurora piloted the plane upward. The sharpshooter was distracted by the movement of the first plane, therefore he had no time to adjust to the movement from the next plane and he lost a clear shot. He shot at the engine but there was no effect. "Don't head for the vault but the Manga Mountains. We will lose them there," said T'Challa. Aurora located the Manga Mountain range on her computerized map. "Hold on," Aurora said. Her defense system indicated that numerous enemy planes were nearby. She took the plane to 9,000 feet and headed for the Manga Mountains. Naya had good news when she entered the president's new office. Taku was in custody and freely assisted the investigation. Suddenly her phone rang. The phones of the other advisors also rang. The message she received took away the success of the capture of Taku. Saudi Arabia had vanished from the face of the earth and a gigantic 12-mile ship had appeared in the Indian Ocean. When Achebe was told, his thoughts were, "Clear thinking and solid action is required, and what part does T'Challa have in this? I want a conference call with all the world powers in the next 10 minutes, said Achebe. "In the meantime I want to know where the machine went to, the status of T'Challa, the public informed of the situation and cruisers sent to the Indian Ocean." 40 minutes later, the snow-capped mountain range Manga grew more majestic the closer Aurora's plane came to them. The red lights that flashed on her dashboard brought her back to reality. She leaned the steering stick to the right. The thrust from a missile clouded the window on the left. T'Challa stated that he had lost contact with his plane that he sent in another direction to split the pursuers. She saw the specific mountain top that T'Challa had mentioned in his plan and landed there. She and T'Challa got out the plane and ran towards the large rocks for cover. Fighter jets roared overhead and dropped scrambler missiles that latched onto Aurora's plane. The missiles sent an electrical surge through the plane that paralyzed it. T'Challa and Aurora ran down the slope towards a hut when the fighter planes were far away. The hut was padlocked but T'Challa broke it off. Aurora entered the hut and automatically put on one of the 2 snow coats that were there. She armed herself with a metal pole that she would use as a fighting staff. She watched as T'Challa made a dummy from a shovel, rope, snow picks, a snow coat and a snow hat. He would withstand the coldness. He filled 2 bags with ropes, picks and flares. He found a hammer, nails, and 2 small metal pans. He filled the pans with heavy objects, bent the nails at the base of the pans and attached a measured rope from one kin to the next. "Ready?" he asked as gave his wife a knife. Aurora nodded a confirmation. He placed a bundle of rope around his neck and up under his right arm, took up the bags, the dummy and the bola. They left the hut and continued along the wind-swept slope. The hunters must not be too far away, thought Aurora. T'Challa believed the hunters would be sent out after them. Aurora stopped as her husband dropped most of his load, so he could skillfully move onto a deceptively slippery slope, and there he planted the dummy behind a rock. Afterwards, they hurried to a cluster of boulders and hid themselves. The hunters appeared on top of the slope and there were 10 of them. The wind and ice took away their invisibility advantage. Therefore, half their bodies were hidden and the other half covered by snow. 4 of the hunters went after the dummy and they went over the mountain. That caused confusion among the hunters. "Let's take them," said T'Challa. "Watch for the nano bullets," said Ororo and smiled. "I will," said T'Challa as he took out the flares. He lit one and leapt out from the spot he hid. He sprinted towards the hunters who were focused on the slope that their comrades went over. T'Challa leapt at the nearest one to him. T'Challa mercilessly stuck the flare into the hunter's mask eye shields that melted. The man screamed. T'Challa rose up with man lifted over his head and flung him towards the hunter at the edge of the slippery slope. He moved swiftly to his left while he unwrapped the bola from his waist. He spun the bola and sent it to another close hunter. The bola wrapped itself tautly around the man's shoulders and chest. The last of the hunters were focused on T'Challa, therefore Ororo was able to reach them unnoticed. She swung the staff and knocked the rifle from a hunter. The man attempted to punch her but Ororo was quicker and seized his arm and used the momentum of the attack to throw the man. She dropped to the rifle and changed the setting to grenade launcher. She aimed and fired at the head of the hunter that was about to shoot at T'Challa. The hunter fell from the impact of the grenade blast. She then turned the rifle on the hunter she had thrown and fired the grenade into his face. T'Challa had subdued the last hunter in a headlock. He took off the rope from around his neck and tossed it to Ororo. She tied up the hunter who was stunned by the grenade to the face. T'Challa unmasked the hunters felled by Ororo and punched them so they lost consciousness. The second stage of the plan was completed. Ororo knowingly ran towards the boulders to where there was a cave entrance. T'Challa was not far behind. Chapter 6 Achebe was silent when he was told that T'Challa and wife had escaped into the cave networks of the Manga Mountains. "They could be in 100 places," said the mission commander. "Thank you for the update," said Achebe. "If Taku has been honest, then T'Challa would be the one to save the country and the world from this Demo character," thought Achebe. "And he probably saved my life. But I cannot leave the fate of my people on sentiment. I need to be certain." He called the director in charge of Taku and ordered truth serum to be used unofficially on a second interrogation of the prisoner. A holographic map of the Indian Ocean was in front of Achebe. There were colored indicators on the map that represented military forces and their affiliated countries that had surrounded the strange ship. Another holograph had the pictures and dimensions of the ship. The ship had an irregular shape. It looked as though the ship was originally circular, but an outward explosion had removed a sector. There was a knock on the door and Naya entered the room. "Mr. President, they are ready," said Naya. Achebe went to the next room that had the other advisors. They were to give him a detailed report on a worst-case scenario and possible retaliations against the strange ship. Meanwhile, Damo left the body of the scientist and returned to his original body. He was a green smooth skin, 10-foot being with 4 arms, well-developed arm and chest muscles, a long face, yellow eyes, and a bald head. He wore blue regal robes from his native planet. The ship's computer finished its task of understanding the Earth's communication system. "Time to properly introduce myself," thought Damo. He had tested the machine when he removed Saudi Arabia and placed it in the Wakandan's bubble in the Haven dimension. And he would return the country as a form of goodwill. He was impressed by the machine and by the Wakandans from what he had gathered from the scientist. He was correct to have singled them out all those years ago. T'Challa and Ororo reached the hidden vault entrance in one of the caves. T'Challa entered a password for the door. Ororo smiled when she noticed the new password was the date she and T'Challa had first met. T'Challa entered and turned on the lights that revealed an assortment of Omega-level items in a red room. The air was not stuffy because of the air recycling machine that ran silently. Ororo turned on the giant monitor that displayed multiple new channels. T'Challa went towards the brass and gold frogs that were recovered from what was then the King Solomon mines. Each frog weighed a pound and had the ability to travel through time and dimensions. Moreover, the frogs were intelligent and puerile. "Who is Damo?" T'Challa asked authoritatively. The frogs did not respond. "T'Challa, look at this," said Ororo. Damo's face appeared on all the channels. "People of Earth. I am Damo. I have the power to remove nations from this planet and return them if I so choose. I will only use this power against the enemies of Wakanda. Therefore there should be in future no threats to Wakanda. I am watching and listening," said Damo. T'Challa got the sword called the Ebony Blade that could kill anything and returned to the frogs. "You know what this can do?" "Again, who is Damo?" asked T'Challa coldly. There was no response. "So be it," said T'Challa and brought the sword down on the brass frog. "He is our master," shouted the brass frog. "Why was he in Wakanda?" asked T'Challa. There was no response. T'Challa dropped the blade hard between the frogs. "Studying," answered the gold frog. "What was he studying?" asked T'Challa. "The intelligence of the people." "He is a scout," the gold frog said. "Why did he abandon you?" asked Ororo. "He was attacked," replied the brass frog. "Who attacked him?" asked Ororo. "We don't know," responded the brass frog. Elsewhere, President Achebe returned to his private office where he received a call from the director who had interrogated Taku. "He is telling the truth, sir," said the director. "Thank you, and remember this never happened," said Achebe. "Yes, Mr. President," said the director. Achebe deliberated for a moment and then he wrote a speech. Chapter 7: People of Wakanda and by extension the world will not tolerate bullies. And we Wakandans can take care of ourselves. Wakanda does not appreciate nor do we side with Damo. And we will fight him. And we shall be victorious. Presently our forces along with forces of other countries have Damo's ship surrounded. There shall be swift international retaliations on Damo for his abuse of power," said President Achebe. Ororo nodded in agreement with Achebe's national address. She looked at the clock and it would be another 5 hours until her mutant powers would be restored. "You look marvelous," said T'Challa. He commented on how Ororo looked in the vibranium weave suit that he made for her and had kept in the vault as a spare along with his Black Panther ceremonial suit. "How does it feel?" asked Ororo as she watched T'Challa put on the mask. "It makes me feel guilty. Like I did something that I should not have when I gave up the kingship, and all that is happening is somehow my fault. And I didn't like combating my countrymen even if it was them or us," answered T'Challa. "You did what you believed in your heart was right," Ororo said and embraced him. "Are we taking the ebony blade?" asked Ororo. "No. If we fail I don't want him getting his hands on anything else of great power," replied T'Challa. He held Ororo's hand as he stood in front of the frogs. He took the gold frog and Ororo took the brass frog and they placed the frogs one on top the other. "Take us to Damo," said T'Challa. The frogs illuminated as they teleport themselves, T'Challa and Ororo to the ship. Damo was unfazed by President Achebe's stern words, but displeased that he had not killed the man when he had the opportunity. Since the Wakandans had a tendency for strong leaders who would pose a threat. Damo looked at the hand that had 3 fingers severed in combat with the Wakanda chieftain Bashanga. The ship's computer indicated that there were intruders. "Show me," said Damo. A hologram appeared in front of Damo that showed a masked human in a black suit with a cape and a woman with white hair in a black and white suit. The humans held the timeline's research instruments that Damo had used to totally evaluate Earth and had disguised as Wakanda frogs that once populated near his base. T'Challa the Black Panther and Ororo the Storm, thought Damo, as he recalled information from the people he had taken over. And T'Challa is a direct descendant of Bashan-Ga and the real king of Wakanda. Therefore I will have my revenge and eliminate the real threat. But first, ship has contact been made with home? Asked Damo. In 3 more cycles, replied the ship. And what of the ships outside? Inquired Damo. They have commenced an attack. Walls remain intact. Most of the attack has been directed to the damaged hull. Interior walls remain intact, answered the ship. T'Challa and Ororo were surprised. The ship was made out of vibranium. The interior walls of the ship were smooth and grey. The floors were wet and water trickled in the background. The corridors were 40 feet high and semi-conical. The air carried no scent that Ororo was aware of, but T'Challa had found 2 scents, one of a human and the other something else. Up ahead, said T'Challa. T'Challa and Ororo walked towards the end of the corridor and came upon a great hall. The machine was on the right side and the scientist laid next to it. Damo sat on a throne. Master, shouted the frogs. But you have new masters, said Damo. Never, said the frogs. Very well, reveal yourselves, said Damo. The frogs slowly transformed into ghost-like forms and flanked Damo. What is this all about? Asked T'Challa. Didn't your forefather pass down the story? And what about you, the woman? I see that the mutation gene of blonde hair did not disappear from your people, asked Damo. Then enlighten us, said Ororo. This is all about Wakanda. The society has been evaluated and found to be suitable for amalgamation, said Damo. You should have consulted with them first, said Ororo. There is nothing to discuss. They have been chosen, said Damo. The ship interrupted. Contact with the home has been established, said the ship. Great, let me see my home, said Damo. They shall behold the glory and wonders of my home, thought Damo. A giant hologram came up in the hall and showed smoldering ruins. Damo was silent as he stared at the images. This is my chance, thought Ororo. She stealthily reached the scientist. She checked his pulse and he was still alive. You are a scout for a conquering empire, thought T'Challa, but the empire is no more. Identify yourself, said a voice. I am Damo, field researcher, said Damo. Teehee signature of your ship is centuries old, said the voice. I was in hibernation after my ship was damaged, said Damo. And your ship is registered with the Talons, said the voice. Don't the Talons rule? Asked Damo. The Talon regime was disposed of. The Nitas rule, said the voice. Those monsters rule, thought Damo in horror. And what of the Ada? Asked Damo. Eradicated, said the voice. Then there is no hope for my home, thought Damo. You will be boarded shortly. Do not attempt to resist, said the voice. They will take Wakanda for themselves, thought Damo. I cannot allow that. Damo faced the machine. I will send Wakanda into oblivion, said Damo. T'Challa unsheathed the metal claws from his gloves but could not continue. He could not kill Damo, in cold blood. A portal opened on the right side of Damo and he was struck in the chest by a laser beam. T'Challa stood over the pained face of Damo. Tears swelled in Damo's eyes. The great civilization his kind had fought for was destroyed. Ship play record eyelid, muttered Damo. Damo's eyes closed as he died. Record eyelid commencing. Wakanda region identified as displaying superior intellectual and technological growth and meets requirements for entry to the Hidas civilization. Attempts to procure a Wakanda specimen named Bashanga met interference from Ada rebel forces. Battles over Atlantic Ocean, Antarctic and Wakanda. This ship and Ada vessel sustained major damage. Bashanga wounded ship captain in escape. Mission deemed failure. Ship sought refuge in dimensional pathway to Hida's home world. Captain and ship placed in cold status. Captain's wounds healed over time. Recent activity in pathway and energy discharges awakened ship's systems. Mission restarted since Wakanda has exceeded expectations. Threats to Wakanda and operation identified and dealt with, said the ship. The portal opened wider. A heavily armored humanoid warrior with a large red shield and lance strode out of the portal. The armor was decorated by symbols and there was a design of a fierce creature on the breastplate. Chapter 8 I am Asa, king of Hades, said Asa, proudly. Immediately the computer in Asa's helmet took over the ship and the history was given to Asa. He walked over and spat into Damo's face. Thank you for bringing this new member Wakanda to the block, Asa said. Wakanda is not to be added to anything, said T'Challa. I will tolerate your directness because you are also of royal blood, said Asa, after he was supplied with the information on T'Challa. Meanwhile the instrument beings circled T'Challa. They are yours now since their master is dead. I ordain it, said Asa. Ororo joined T'Challa. Asa's computer entered into the international communications network, therefore everything was broadcast to the Earth. The computer also had a link to the Hades intergalactic communications, so the entire empire listened and watched the events. I don't understand your resistance to amalgamation. Civilizations like Wakanda must unite against the less civilized and advanced. Together we will be strong and progressive, leaving the others to flounder. Wakanda must be with its kind even if it is unwilling, said Asa. We will fight you, said T'Challa. Actually the country does not have to fight me. I'm a lover of the classical ways. I will battle its ruler and its ruler only, Asa said. Should I win, Wakanda will be taken, and should I lose, the victor shall take my kingdom as his own. The alternative is me coming back and wiping out all the other nations and leaving Wakanda alone on this planet. And if you doubt the magnitude of our capabilities, inquire from Galactus about the ancestors of the Celestials and why he told his heralds to bypass his worlds under our protection. I shall return in an Earth week. Then Asa teleport to the Hades home world. I will be waiting, thought T'Challa. New captain, what are your orders? Asked the ship. Return to the pathway dimension and shut down, said T'Challa. Take us and the machine out of here, said Ororo to the instruments. She had the scientist close by. The instruments obeyed. In central city Wakanda, the young man Salace looked out his window at the skyline. He had watched the city grow for centuries as an Ada construct disguised as a human, so he could report if the Hades Empire ever returned for Wakanda, and now that they did, the person chosen to fight Asa would need to know what Salace had to say. Next story, The King Returns. Chapter 1. The OC director struck the end of the brown report folder on the table, then he opened it to read a truncation of the inquiry's findings into the Demo fiasco that had left the Earth faced with annihilation in 7 days. Present at the meeting were Amjuni Achebe, President of Wakanda, T'Challa, Ororo Munro, Ebo Mto, Presidential Advisor, and Aji Naya, Presidential Advisor. Absent from the meeting were Taku Kempta, Military Scientist, and Njinga Mto, Military Scientist. The OC director cleared his throat, then he proceeded. Between 9.00 m and 9.05 m yesterday, Wakanda was transported to the Haven dimension and returned to the 616 dimension through the use of our Hyder machine. At approximately 9:15 am, Taku Kempta arrived at the home of T'Challa and Ororo Munro and informed T'Challa that the experiment placed Wakanda in danger, that we awakened an entity called Demo. At approximately 9:45 am, Ororo Monroe returned from the United States and heard Taku's complaint, whereupon she advised her husband to call the president. The president and T'Challa disagreed on the danger posed to Wakanda, as several military scientists had passed the Haven Dimension, and Taku had been released from the project for interference. Afterwards, T'Challa, Ororo and Taku went to the Nest facility to speak with the prisoner Darkheart, who had first warned about Damo, as stated by station scientist Njinga Mto. The group discovered the prisoner was dead. The culprit was Damo. Damo had inhabited Njinga Mto's mind, and afterwards her father, presidential advisor Ebo Mto, who had visited his daughter. They'd taken over. Ebo Mto went to the office of the president, where T'Challa and Ororo fought him. They'd taken over. Ebo Mto escaped and stole the hider machine. T'Challa and Ororo sought their timeline research instruments that were associated with Damo for more information. Damo sent Saudi Arabia to the Haven Dimension and returned the country 5 hours later. He threatened to do the same with any nation that was hostile towards Wakanda. Wakanda declared war on Damo and attacked his vessel that appeared above the Indian Ocean. T'Challa and Ororo used the timeline research instruments to board Damo's ship. Damo declared that Wakanda was marked for annexation to an alien civilization called the Hedis. Damo was killed before further information could be extracted from him. Damo's killer boarded the ship and stated his name was Asa, king of the Hedis. Asa stated that Wakanda would be annexed by the end of an Earth week. However, the annexation would be prevented should the leader of Wakanda defeat him in combat, and if Wakanda defied his terms, he would destroy the world's nations except for Wakanda. President Achebe closed his copy of the document and spoke in his frank, authoritative manner. "I have to make a decision in 2 hours for an emergency UN meeting. Still, I want all bases covered." Asa, sounds overconfident. And what do we know about the Hedis? The question was posed to T'Challa and Ororo, which was a moment that Achebe had tried to avoid, since he had pledged secretly with Ebo that the administration would distance itself from the former royal couple, and if it did require their expertise, that it would be in a minimal capacity. Admittedly, Achebe realized the futility of that policy in light of the Damo incident. Achebe had kept a dossier on the former royal couple's activities since they had left office. T'Challa, when he was not saving the world, was a Wakanda University scientist who gave guest lectures to campuses throughout the world on physics. Whereas, Ororo Monroe was Time magazine's Person of the Year for her work in Africa and the Middle East. Her strange features, natural straight white hair and natural blue eyes did not raise eyebrows like her inspirational life story did. Orphaned in Cairo due to a terrorist attack, was a street thief until she was 12, ventured into her native Kenya where she took up the mantle of village priestess. She was recruited to join a mutant team mandated to smoothen relations between Homo sapiens and mutants, formed her own United Nations Mutant Task Force, became Queen of Wakanda and formed an organization that battled the spread of AIDS, HIV, and climate change. "We have spoken with the Watcher. He stated that the Hedis exists beyond Shi'ar space, in a cluster of galaxies," replied Ororo. Asa also stated that the Hedis civilization were the ancestors of the Celestials. The Celestials are powerful intergalactic scientists who experiment on planets and organisms. Therefore, the civilization may be advanced military-wise. However, I am not perturbed by his boast that Galacticus is afraid of the civilization, since the planet Eater does have weaknesses that we are aware of, said T'Challa. Ebo, snowy-haired and broad-faced, had listened to T'Challa attentively. Ebo had disliked T'Challa at that moment since the man had broken his nose during the fight in the president's office. As a result, Ebo wore an awkward nose bandage that itched. He also did not like the 2 gold orbs, the timeline instruments that floated behind the heads of the former royal couple. One orb had the mark of a cross and the other the mark of a tree. They were to be outside like any other pet, thought Ebo. Ebo was not impressed with the answers and made this known: with all due respect, we need stronger intelligence. What do we really know about these aliens? His eyes rolled from T'Challa to Ororo. 2 years prior, Ebo was once one of the second-tier council members who had watched over Wakanda while the king and queen were absent for prolonged periods on their superhero business, and though he respected their work, he deemed the couple to be deleterious to the good governance of Wakanda. In light of the limited intelligence, do we take up Aza's challenge? Asked Naya. Naya was at the meeting because she was appointed by the president to fill the position of chief advisor when Ebo was hospitalized, after he was abandoned by Damo. She had a professional disagreement with Ebo the terrier, because he protected the president more than the country. Her connection with the president, who rewarded those with a record of service and wit, was the main reason Ebo had not moved against her, like he did with his other enemies. Nevertheless, it was the first time that Naya had met Ororo. Naya had thought it unwise that the king had married an outsider. Additionally, she had privately voiced speculation about if the couple would or should have children because of their dangerous lifestyles. The intruder alarm cut into the meeting like a knife, and it stopped Achebe before he could remark. A worried chief of security burst into the room. The office has been breached, shot from his mouth. Chairs slid back, someone banged a knee on the table. Have we identified the intruder? Asked Achebe. The intruder said he was an Ada. Everyone at the table stopped moving. Ada aliens had defeated Damo centuries ago, hence the reason he recuperated in the Haven dimension. But all the Ada were presumed to be dead. Achebe bore that in mind, and since there was little tactical intelligence, he was not about to pass on an opportunity, even if it was risky. I want to speak with this person. Tell everyone to stand down and allow him through, said Achebe. Yes, Mr. President, said the security chief. The chief of security gave out the president's orders and reported while they waited. The intruder tried to use telepathy on the front guards, but the psi helmets blocked him out. He is described as being in the mid-20s, average height, slim build, shaven head, wearing a blue t-shirt and khaki long pants. He is carrying an object in a silver box, that scans say is a spherical. It cannot be determined if it is an explosive or another weapon. The database states his name is Akin Salace, lives alone in Central City, is an eye specialist trainee. Have a team sent to his apartment, said Achebe. Yes, Mr. President. He is 5 meters from this location. Open the door for him, said Achebe confidently. Achebe stood his ground, knowing he had a renowned warrior and an Omega mutant at his sides. Ebo and Naya had muted doubts but followed their leader. Chapter 2. A large shadow was cast into the door entrance from the corridor. Salace paused near the door. A ring of 50 officers surrounded the artificial young man. He was disappointed in himself since the plan to use trickery to get to the president had failed. The reason was that he had not prepared properly. Instead, he had rushed out of the house after he saw Aza's live broadcast from Damo's ship. For Salace, the trickery emitting light signals from his eyes into the eyes of humans that rendered their minds open for his manipulation had never failed before in the 10,000 years it was used to maintain his identity. The one time he unselfishly used the trick was when he had wiped Bashanga's memory of the abduction by Damo, because it caused the first king mental illness. Salace entered the room. He focused on the president. Good morning, I am an Ada construct here to give you information on the Hida. Achebe gestured to Salace to stop. Before you continue, we want to know the contents of that box, said Achebe. It is a communicator. If you allow, I will contact the Ada, replied Salace and raised the box up to open it. Achebe gestured for Salace to hold on and pointed to a chair. Have a seat first. Thank you, said Salace. Ororo saw past the young man's fleshy appearance that hid hard light laced with an elaborate energy circuitry. "Close the door behind you, Nethano, thank you," said Achebe. "Yes, Mr. President." Achebe took his seat and the others followed. "Let us hear the information," said Achebe. Salace released all he knew like water from a burst dam. The Hedis call their policy the preservation of intellectual populations in the cosmos. However, there were three different views on how to carry out the policy. The Talon's school of thought stated that force was necessary to annex nations or planets that resisted. The Nita's school of thought stated that those that resisted must be protected from their enemies and protection meant annihilation. The Ada school of thought is that peoples who do not want to be annexed should be left alone. Achebe scratched his forehead. Damo of the Talons came as a scout, and he chose Wakanda. Correct. The three schools of thought vied to find intellectually advanced peoples, said Salace. They used interdimensional channels to travel over the distances, the Haven dimension being one such channel, said T'Challa. Yes, said Salace. He surveyed the faces at the table that stared back with juicy interest, especially at the silver box that was next to him. We were told that the Ada were dead, said Ororo. I am not aware of that. I am to call them if the Hedis returned. Who said that they were dead? Asked Salace. Damo had contacted the Hedis and he was told that the Nitas ruled and the Talons and Ada were eradicated, replied T'Challa. Achebe thought it through and said, there is one way to find out. Contact them. Salace unlocked the box and a red sphere levitated out. The sphere could have fitted into a man's hand. Salace activated the sphere remotely from his brain as he had practiced over 1,000,000 times in the test mode. The communicator shot a beam that disappeared into the air where time and space began to ripple like a pool of water after a pebble had fallen into it. It is transmitting through a micro-traversable wormhole. They had that technology centuries ago. Imagine what they can accomplish presently, thought T'Challa. How long will this take? Asked Ebo. I do not know, replied Salace. The sphere made a ping sound. Chapter 3 It has found a receiver, said Salace, and he continued, we should get a response right. At first the sound was low but it grew louder. It was garbled. Someone is on the other end, said Salace. The Ada are still alive, he thought. A small translucent pyramid floated out of the wormhole. Everyone rose from their seats. Salace and the pyramid communicated in an alien language, and then Salace held onto the pyramid. His body illuminated until he had released the pyramid. The pyramid retreated into the wormhole. Afterwards the wormhole closed. Salace said Achebe. It is all right. That was another Ada construct. It upgraded my system and I downloaded new information. It is true the Ada group is gone. I have the military capabilities of the Nitas, the designs for their time jammers and Aza's personal force field. Hold on, get the generals in here, said Achebe. Chapter 4 They want us to roll over, thought Achebe. He had finished the address to the United Nations. The feedback was not positive. Saudi Arabia's disappearance had taken the price of crude oil to $1,000 per barrel. The easy manner the Hyder machine had fallen into rogue hands had proven that it had to be either be regulated or destroyed. Furthermore, it was hinted that it was Wakanda's fault that the world faced annihilation. The Prime Minister of Zibur had said frankly he hoped that Wakanda would not hesitate to sacrifice itself to save the world, that there was no other option. Achebe was notified that his wife had arrived at the residence, and he left the presidential office for home. Achebe had been married for 25 years and had 2 sons. He loved his family and they loved him. His support was Mrs. Achebe. She had stood by when he had made the transition from the military to the political ranks, and his rise from obscurity to become the nation's leader. He needed her presently because of the guilt he felt. The Hyder machine was his initiative. He had ignored the warnings from those that opposed the project, and their misgivings turned out to be true. He had made mistakes before in a leadership role, but those were different. The fallouts were not substantially material. He had an even bigger decision to make once the threat was over and Wakanda had won. He planned to step down from office. "We have to look at it differently," said Mrs. Achebe. "You have to learn from this experience, but you can't run away from the responsibility." "What about accountability? Think of all the administration's successes in the social programs. Are those enough to cover such a big blunder?" "I believe so." "Okay. I will give it a second thought." The phone rang and it was Mookie on the other end. Mookie was a stalwart in the old council. When democracy came, he joined the OPTM group and assisted them in winning the elections. Therefore, he was a heavy hitter in the party. Achebe was asked to attend a special meeting of the party's heavy hitters. The meeting was held in the wee hours of the second day till the deadline. There were 10 heavy hitters that chaired the meeting. The agenda was who would fight Asa. The committee had a decision that they hoped Achebe would agree to. At 7 o'clock another meeting was convened. It was between the OPTM and UNDA. A proposal was agreed upon. Chapter T'Challa and Salace worked in a lab to build a dark force field similar to the one that protected Asa, and they were assisted by an army of military scientists. Raw dark force, a bundle of black twisting matter, was extracted from the dimension where it was only found. The exercise was guided by Salace based on the information he had received from the Ada server. The Ada had never completed the force field, and the reason was never known, therefore it was not placed on the server. However, it was known that the Ada who attempted to build the force field died from it. That is not too encouraging, thought T'Challa. It was not long before he found the reason that the Ada had failed. Dark force was volatile when manipulated, and once control was lost, then dark force became explosive. T'Challa evacuated the lab, but Salace, the timeline instruments, and himself remained. The dark force threatened to burst the mechanical blocks that surrounded it, and T'Challa had estimated that after 5 minutes the dark force would explode. He ordered the timeline instruments to constantly wrap time and space around the dark force. The dark force then stabilized. At home, Ororo spoke with her organization about the continuity of their programs. Afterwards, she dealt with the concerns of the creators of the climate change regulator machine that was expected to launch shortly. Ororo was a special consultant to the project, and the creators wanted assurances that she would be available. But Ororo gave no guarantees, but wished the project success. T'Challa and Ororo were called to the Counselor building that was next to the monumental pillar for lives lost in the Dark Heart attack. T'Challa had ordered the monument's construction, which was one of several official acts before he had dissolved the kingship. He watched the monument out the corner of his eye from a window in the conference room. President Achebe and the OPTM super hitters and the leader of the UNDA and his heavy hitters were at the meeting. The proposal was put forward to T'Challa and Ororo by both political groups. T'Challa held his wife's hand. "We knew this would happen," thought T'Challa. "We are bad for this country. We will only further jeopardize the safety of its people from the reprisals of our enemies," said T'Challa. "It will be for a few hours, afterwards leadership will be returned to Achebe," said Mookie. He had mentored T'Challa in politics after the boy had returned a man from a foray into Africa, which was considered T'Challa's first act of rebellion against Wakandan customs. The rebellion continued when T'Challa gradually moved Wakanda out of economical and political isolation. The pinnacle of the rebellion was the marriage to Ororo. "You are the best warrior the country has," said Kwesi, the leader of the UNDA. He was for bipartisanism because he had loved the country and did not want it in the hands of Asa. The stories Salais had related were horrific. Achebe was 59 years old with a shaky right hand and not combat fit, therefore he would be a pushover to an able warrior like Asa. T'Challa agreed to the plan. A press conference was scheduled within the 2 hours that followed the meeting. The official statement said that T'Challa and Ororo were appointed temporary leaders of the Wakanda by a special majority of the council. The news reverberated throughout the world. Kamuso Nginda's demur for the appointments got his blood hot. His attention shifted from the news on the television to the family photo on his desk that held the smiles of his deceased daughters and wife. They had perished in Darkheart's attack that Nginda blamed ultimately on T'Challa and Ororo's actions. He remembered the charred remains of his family that he had to identify. The smell that he would never forget. Teary-eyed from watching the picture, Nginda hurriedly called Anesha Slay for them to meet. Slay worked downstairs in intelligence data entry as a division manager. A job she clung onto since her husband and brother had committed suicide under Darkheart's influence. She had been glad when T'Challa and Ororo had left office. Her disdain for the two meant that the psychologist had made no progress with her to adjust to life after the lost. Nginda had the same problem. The two mourners shared the same counseling sessions. They became good friends and were openly against T'Challa and Ororo. Are our leaders crazy? How could they place the incompetent and the immigrant back into power and without speaking to the people beforehand, said Nginda. They don't have faith in themselves. That is the message that the government is sending to us, said Slay. Nginda had been working on a plan before the news broke. As passionately as he hated T'Challa and Ororo, he loved Wakanda. His patriotism prompted the idea that he would form a resistance movement if Asa took control of Wakanda. He had people who would follow his leadership, and he had military resources for guerrilla warfare. But a challenge to Asa would need extraordinary human abilities that the Hacher Project would provide. The Hacher Project was an eyes-only contingency plan in the event the Savage Hulk attacked Wakanda. The project transformed a chosen candidate into a behemoth that had a hard exoskeleton skin, rapid healing, Savage Hulk strength, super endurance, and self-flight. Nginda had schemed that during Asa and Achebe's war fight that the military facility nicknamed Resurrection Altar that contained the Hacher would be vulnerable. The operation would need 2 operatives for it to be done since Nginda already possessed the security bypass codes that were given to him. The first operative would enter the rebirth chamber while the second operative would be a guard. Slay nominated herself. That is not a good idea, said Nginda. I have a great eye in simulated field work, said Slay. There is a difference. And then Nginda stopped. Then what? Then I care about you too much, said Nginda as he felt his chest lightened. Don't be foolish. Who else can help you? Asked Slay. She liked Nginda, but it was too soon for another relationship. Nginda was embarrassed, and he moved past it. All right. Chapter after T'Challa addressed the nation with Ororo on the new status quo, he returned to the lab. He had to test his sword, the ebony blade, on the dark force field. The blade of the sword was made from a metal that no longer existed. The hilt and the handle had no fanciful decorations. The sword's simplicity in style hid its potent quality. The sword could cut through any known substance. However, when T'Challa swung the sword hard at the force field, the blade broke. He had to think of a new ordnance that could penetrate the dark force field. Then the thought struck him. Could the properties of the dark force cancel out each other? The computer models were inconclusive, but T'Challa continued with the idea. He laid down the designs for a new sword. The hilt and handle would be constructed of vibranium metal. The thick blade would be made of dark force, and its shape would be kept by the timeline instruments in 2 ways: they would minimize their atomic mass size to become bolts located between the blade and the hilt, and the rest of the timeline mass would run along the center of the blade. Finally, the nanny ties in the hilt would be released from a trigger button in the handle. Collectively, the nanny ties would form a hard black sheathing for the blade. However, the major problem with the plan was the time constraint. 1 day remained before the deadline expired. The construction of the sword would use up the time that remained. Additionally, once the timeline instruments were used to make the sword, there would be no way of controlling the rest of the dark force, which meant that it would be placed in a less manipulative state. However, if the dark force was needed, it would require 5 days to prepare it. Therefore, once the sword was completed, there would be no means of testing it. The political parties were less than pleased. The fate of the country and the world rested on a weapon that no one except for T'Challa believed could work. His wife was confident in the plan. Meanwhile, she faced a challenge of her own. The propitiatory gifts sent to Saudi Arabia did not work. The king was furious with Wakanda, even more so there were factions in the Middle East that were plotting against Wakanda. Therefore, Ororo was using her favorable reputation in the region to release the tension that had built up. One conspiracy theory that floated around was that Wakanda wanted Saudi Arabia gone for Wakanda to take its place as a major oil exporter. I told them Wakanda does not use its oil reserves, much less wants to trade in it. We have been going back and forth all day. T'Challa gave his wife encouragement for her battle. Then he concentrated on the sword with Selace as his personal assistant. Selace was a proficient physicist, one of numerous skills he learnt after living in Wakanda for centuries. "What else did you do?" inquired T'Challa. He and Selace were working on the blade. "I recorded the country's history and had a run-in with Anansi and the other superhumans created by exposure to raw vibranium." T'Challa wiped a film of perspiration from his forehead and raised his left brow. "Anansi is a real person." "Yes, he and the others called gods like the Panther god, the Lion god and the White Gorilla were all human. But now they are immortal." T'Challa spoke as he worked on the wavelengths. "I have seen them in another realm." "You saw them in the pocket universe that they had created to escape Anansi, since he is more powerful than them combined." Wakandans created two religions, one worshipped the Panther god and the other White Gorilla, but those beings were merely men, thought T'Challa aloud. Even mighty Bashan-Ga was fooled. T'Challa paused from his work. He saw the image of the first king in gold robes, with a spear and shield. "How was my forefather?" "He was everything stories said. He was athletic, powerful, cunning, caring. He saved Wakanda from itself, and by closing the borders the world." T'Challa felt the weight on his shoulders whenever he pondered on the legacy of his illustrious ancestors. "Where is Anansi?" T'Challa inquired. "He is out there in the world somewhere." "How did you get involved?" The pair were interrupted by a scientist who brought the message about a phenomenon in the skies over Wakanda. Chapter: Birds fell from the sky and others had perched on anything they could find to escape the sky that was rolled back and revealed outer space. The darkness that fell on the nation was like a total eclipse. "People of Wakanda, Ieza, king of the Hedus, will give a glimpse of the happiness, freedom from terror, creativity and understanding that will be yours." Images of alien cities and wonders appeared and disappeared in a flash. Soon afterwards, "We do not want it," was a chant that rose in Central City. The sky rolled back as the wormhole closed. Ororo gathered her breath from the violent planetary magnetic fields that were caused by the wormhole that had shook her. She was given a glass of water by Naya. Naya had been assisting on the negotiations with Jordan, Egypt, Syria, Saudi Arabia, and Iran. She had witnessed Ororo's competence and Arabic language skills when dealing with the countries. "He is trying propaganda," said Ororo. "But he does not know that Wakanda wants to keep to itself," said Naya. The two women exchanged glances. Ororo knew when she was not liked. As a mutant she was hated and feared. In Wakanda she was mostly disliked. She knew that her name was whispered about in unflattering terms. Still she loved Wakanda. She loved the people and the land, the crystallized forest, the giant white gorillas and the sight of Warriors Falls. Once she had mentioned to her husband the hostility the people had towards her, and his reply was that she would grow on them. The dark heart attack did not help the growing process. The Egyptian president was online again after being disconnected by the wormhole. He got reports of a disturbance in Wakanda which left Ororo having to explain and shrugging off the glance, since she considered Nya to be a professional who wanted the job completed no matter her opinions. Chapter The world's media gathered in Central City and they brought their paraphernalia: helicopters, camera, cell phones, television vans and satellite radios. The one pertinent question they asked themselves was where exactly would the battle to be held? The enigma was solved by the platform the size of 4 football fields that emerged from a wormhole in the mid-morning sky. The platform hovered over Central City and the media scrambled to get a favorable vantage point. The first crews caught a shining humanoid Asa on the platform waiting for Wakanda's leader. Asa held a weapon in his left hand. The ordnance had 2 blades at both ends of a handle. A helmet with a plume in the center rested on his head. The chest plate of the Amur bore the roaring head of a beast. The Amur was so polished that one's reflection could be seen in it. T'Challa's Amur was less spectacular. The vibranium-weaved bodysuit was based on pragmatism. The more blows it took, the stronger it became. The mask contained micro-audio visuals that were linked to the defense system. In the right hand was the untested sword. T'Challa arrived at the platform on a skybike and he was tempted to try an intimidation tactic of encircling Asa before he landed, but the principles he had learned for combat were too strong, namely respect the opponent. I am trying to, thought T'Challa. But how could he truly respect a person who had killed billions for an asinine policy? As he walked from the end of the platform to the center where Asa waited, T'Challa recounted the numbers of the dead that Saleh said Asa had killed. Hoth system 300 billion dead, Riyadh planet 90 billion dead and Klo kingdom 80 billion dead. Today justice will be served, thought T'Challa. The 2 leaders stood a few feet from each other and it looked like a mismatched fight. T'Challa was 6 foot while Asa was 6'7". More so, Asa's muscled frame outsized that of T'Challa's. I met you on the ship. You have become the leader since then, said Asa. I am not here for small talk. Let's get on with it, replied T'Challa. Then what is your decision? We fight. Winner takes all. Then I will have no need for the time jammers. Those things, thought T'Challa. The Ada had described the time jammers as being 10 massive machines transported anywhere by wormholes, protected by dark force fields, placed into the orbit of a planet where they were activated to stop the planet's flow of time in all timelines and alternate realities. Therefore, resistance would be eliminated and the planet destroyed easily by the Hedis army. Asa twirled his sword that was famous for an act done by its former wielder, Asa's grandfather. The grandfather had decapitated a celestial in space who had interfered in the Neda's policy. Presently the giant's head contained a micro-universe. Asa took his fight stance. The dark force field appeared and it was a thin veil that waved around Asa. You better work, thought T'Challa as he took guard with his sword. The first move has to be mine, thought T'Challa. He focused on striking Asa's right thigh so as slow him down. T'Challa loosened his body and he charged at Asa. Asa swiveled on his left heel and fired a roundhouse kick into T'Challa's left side abdomen, tossing the Wakandan leader aside. T'Challa winced. Did not think you were a street fighter, thought T'Challa. He rebounded after being floored. He still had the objective in mind, but he had a trick to employ. He attacked the opponent's sword hand. but dropped low at the last moment and slashed the right thigh deeply. T'Challa stood up and waited to see if the sword had penetrated the force field. He saw the opponent launch at him with power. Still T'Challa kept his ground. Asa yelped, wobbled, missed and fell near to T'Challa. "Check your force field, it might be faulty," said T'Challa, and he continued, "Pick up yourself. I will not strike while you are down." T'Challa had felt a burning on his right shoulder. He had been cut. It was not severely deep but deep enough to cause discomfort. Chapter There had been tension in the presidential office when T'Challa was first felled. But he had responded, and most importantly the sword had worked. Therefore, the fight would be based on T'Challa's skills against Asa's skills. Then Ororo received a strange message from a general. A silent alarm had been triggered in a military facility and contact had been lost with the team sent to investigate. Experience told Ororo that the situation needed her input. She left the presidential office and flew to the facility using the Earth's magnetic fields to propel her, therefore she reached the destination in mere minutes. She found the guards and the personnel at the facility unconscious that she tried to inform the president office about, but all the frequencies were impeded. She sensed that a massive amount of electrical energy was converging on the left wing and she went to investigate. She met a masked special forces garbed female guarding a door. "Surrender now," said Ororo. The woman held up a flat circular device. Ororo felt her ears burn and then she knew the nature of the device. It was a sonic neutralizer that Ororo had encountered before and had vowed to never again be susceptible to it. She had started wearing earpieces that filtered out sounds that were above a range. Still Ororo feigned that the device affected her. She collapsed and waited for the attacker to draw close. When the person was within range, Ororo leapt up, held the attacker and sent a short electrical pulse through the who fell unconscious. "Now what were you hiding?" thought Ororo. The ground shook and heavy footsteps came closer from behind the door. Knock knock. When there was no response, a hand that was large enough to hold the torso of a full-grown man in its grip tore through the metal door and then withdrew. "Are you out there?" asked someone in a beastly voice. "She isn't." "I am here though," said Ororo. "Ororo," said the person in vexation. The door crashed down and revealed a hulking creature in a grey exoskeleton. "Get away from her," said the creature. It flung itself at Ororo, who produced a pressure dome around herself that repelled the creature through the roof. She pursued the creature by following its wail. The creature blasted out of the facility and stabilized itself in mid-air. "There will be no let-up for you," thought Ororo. She positioned herself in front of the creature, snapped her fingers in the creature's face and a bright flash occurred that blinded the creature. He swung his arms wildly, which Ororo avoided. "I can still see you, Ororo," said the creature. "Do I know this person? He sounds so personal," thought Ororo. She conjured snow that covered the creature to freeze its joints, but it broke free. "This is payback," said the creature. Ororo dodged the attack and she summoned a twister that captured the creature. Still it broke free. "Explain yourself," said Ororo. The creature darted from the scene and it headed for the second city, Najikata. Ororo overtook it. Then the creature entered a train tunnel and disappeared. She pursued and came up in a vacant train terminal. She hurried to the top entrance and the streets were also vacant. "It is gone," thought Ororo. She contacted the presidential office to inform them of the situation. Suddenly a loud cheer erupted from the buildings. People began to scream, windows opened, heads stuck out, there was shouting, a multitude of people surged onto the streets. Someone ran up to Ororo and hugged her. "We won," the crowd sang. Children were carried on their parents' shoulders, while more emotional people broke down in tears of joy. Tears ran down Ororo's cheeks because she remembered when T'Challa and her were at Darkheart's mercy 2 years ago. There had been people screaming in terror, running for their lives or trying to take it in the streets, while Darkheart had been grinning, surrounded by his willing human shields, taunting T'Challa and Ororo. His telepathic ability had control of the city. Ororo was resistant to it, and T'Challa had been using his invention, the Psi helmet. Then T'Challa made a crucial decision to use the then untrustworthy and evil timeline instruments to transport the people away. T'Challa and the people had disappeared to parts unknown, leaving Ororo to face Darkheart, thin, lanky, yellowed eyes and albino. Ororo immediately shocked Darkheart with lightning, which temporarily stunned his ability to teleport and left him unconscious. 8 hours had passed before T'Challa and the people had returned. 8 hours Ororo had waited patiently on the throne of a shocked kingdom. 8 hours I had prayed for their safe return, thought Ororo. The presidential office called. T'Challa was asking for her. Story, Regime Change Chapter 1. Ororo Monroe, 30 years old, slender, ebony, natural blue eyes and natural long white hair poured over the figures for Wakanda's increased elderly population. The life expectancy age had increased from 95 to 98. The committee that did the research recommended the construction of 200 more elderly community centers. Ororo used her digital pen to sign the document on her tablet computer screen. A reminder came up on the left corner of the screen: a 6:00 p.m. Associated Production Committee meeting to monitor food production for the next quarter. A small message box shot up on the screen. Agent Abigail Brand of the Sentient Worlds Observation and Response Department requested to speak. Ororo accepted the call. Agent Brand's face appeared on the screen. Agent Brand was pale with green hair, thin nose, and a broad forehead. "Good evening, President Ororo," said Brand. "Good evening, Agent Brand. You can call me Ororo." "What is the reason for the call?" asked Ororo. Brand was in a relationship with Hank Beast McCoy, who was Ororo's friend and colleague in the X-Men, a mutant protection and representative team. That was the reason the two women knew each other. "It is about your husband, President T'Challa," said Brand. "Sword kept out the Aza threat to Earth because you and President T'Challa were on it and everything turned out favorably." "So what is the problem then?" inquired Ororo. "Since the time President T'Challa took Aza back to the Hedus sector of space, which was 2 days ago, we have had reports from neighboring sectors of stars and planets exploding in the Hedus sector. I would like to know what is going on." Ororo cracked her fingers, and she rested the digital pen on the desk. "We lost contact with my husband and are trying to regain it." "So we are in the dark like you," replied Ororo. "You are so calm about it," said Brand. "Experience and confidence in my husband's abilities," said Ororo. A second message box came on the screen. The alarm was activated in the military facility that held Aza's helmet and lance. "Excuse me, Brand, I have an emergency to deal with," said Ororo. Chapter 2. Days ago, Damo's blood stained the floor, and the body had decomposed in the 8 days since T'Challa and Aza had last seen it. T'Challa's moral code had prevented him from killing Damo in cold blood when the opportunity had presented itself. Aza murdered Damo mere seconds after T'Challa had chosen not to. The scout ship's computer started the engines, and the ship began its return journey to the Hedus through the dimensional tunnel as ordered by the ship's new captain T'Challa. "T'Challa, let me save you the trip," said Aza. "The Hedus will not prosecute me, and they will not abandon the Neda's policy. Because I, like my father and his father before him, have protected and injected new blood into the civilization. The people love me. Unlike your people who loathe you. Wakanda will never forgive you. I kept to my laid down duties as king, but you went contrary to yours and it came back to haunt you. You consider me a mass genocidal murderer, but you are equally guilty of causing the deaths of 1,000,000 of your people, said Asa, the humanoid alien warrior king, long jade hair, red flaming eyes, hardened face, and a Herculean body. T'Challa, 35 years old, black, wide forehead, broad chin, squared shoulders, broad chest, 6 foot, paced the floor while his hands were behind his back like a soldier in the stand-at-ease position. T'Challa wore the ceremonial Black Panther battle body armor made of microwave vibranium, the rarest and most resistant metal in the universe. The Dark Force blade sword with time and space travel capability, which T'Challa had built, was magnetized to his back. "I am speaking to you," said Asa with a snarl. T'Challa glanced at Asa, who was in the casket-like mobile prisoner container. The only visible part of Asa's body was his face, which was behind a window. T'Challa turned away, and he resumed his thoughts on the conspirators back in Wakanda. They must have used nano-robots to quickly repair the extent of the damage that Ororo had described, thought T'Challa, but how long have these people operated, and who can I then trust? Who are the tares and who are the wheat? Solace, an alien artificial intelligence, disguised as a mid-20s young man, shaven head, long face, brown eyes, small wide nose, squared shoulders, strong arms, returned from his exploration of the ship. "Ada computer, I will enjoy terminating you when I am freed," said Asa to Solace. "Screw you," said Solace in a dignified manner, and he was proud to have used the slang for the first time since he had memorized it. Solace had lived in Wakanda for 10,000 years, and his mission was to call the Ada if the Hydas returned to Wakanda. T'Challa stopped his thoughts when he heard Solace's foul language. Solace's good-natured human-like qualities reminded T'Challa of the android Vision, T'Challa's former teammate on the Avengers under Steve Rogers, the Captain America. "Found anything interesting?" asked T'Challa. "A laboratory and specimen holding cells," replied Solace. T'Challa stared at the high ceiling. Suddenly the ship rocked violently. T'Challa maintained his balance and he shouted, "Ship report." "We have stalled outside of the Hydas throne world," replied the ship in a feminine voice. "Incoming message." "Who could that be?" thought T'Challa. A rough voice spoke in a language that T'Challa could not understand, and he turned to Solace for assistance. Solace realized T'Challa's disadvantage and he translated the message. "I am the commander of the Windrunners, release King Asa at once or die." "Chapter loyalists," thought T'Challa. "Tell him no," said T'Challa, and Solace did as instructed. Asa smirked uncontrollably. "Who are these Windrunners?" T'Challa asked Solace. "Super speed warriors, swords are their weapons of choice. They move so fast that they seem invisible," replied Solace, while he accessed the files that he had downloaded from the Ada server. "Ship transfer a destination coordinate to my sword's computers," said T'Challa. "T'Challa, there is a teleportation net around the ship." "We cannot teleport through it," said the sword. "Captain, we have been boarded by 4 hostiles, laboratory sector," said the ship. Chapter T'Challa devised a plan. "Solace catch," said T'Challa, while he threw the controller for the prisoner container. "Where are you going?" quizzed Solace. "I am stepping out of normal time," responded T'Challa. Asa stopped smirking and he paid attention to T'Challa's ploy. "Sword, move us at a constant rate of 0.3 milliseconds into the future, then 2 milliseconds into the past," said T'Challa. Instantly, he vanished from plain sight. He knew that the ploy had worked because Solace and Asa were frozen in their respective positions. T'Challa removed the sword from his back. The nano-robots that sheathed the blade retreated into the vibranium hilt. T'Challa then remained still. "Am I going to kill them?" thought T'Challa. The first Windrunner sprinted towards T'Challa. The Windrunner was a masked humanoid in a brown uniform and it wielded a thin blade sword. "Do not kill it," thought T'Challa. In a quick movement T'Challa knelt on his right knee and swung his sword into the Windrunner's left knee, thus the lower left leg separated completely from the rest of Windrunner's body. The Windrunner fell forward and froze. In normal time the Windrunner and its separated leg appeared on the floor. The Windrunner went into shock. Solace kicked it in the face and knocked the Windrunner unconscious. 3 more Windrunners came at T'Challa. T'Challa skillfully slashed and severed the Windrunner's sword hands. Solace finished off the Windrunners when they appeared. "Sword switch to normal time," said T'Challa. T'Challa returned, and he had found Solace kicking a sword from a Windrunner. "Ship, can you resume course?" asked T'Challa. "Yes," said the ship. "Continue course," said T'Challa, while he examined Aza's prison for tamper or damage. T'Challa found none. "There will be more," said Aza. "I do not care," said T'Challa. T'Challa then assisted Solace to secure the Windrunners. "Why spare their lives?" whispered Solace. "I only kill when it is warranted," replied T'Challa. "Besides, I want to display them to the Hedis military to show that I am ruthless but can also show leniency." "Oh," said Solace, and he nodded his approval. T'Challa transmitted a message through his palm-held supercomputer, the Kimoyo, to ship's computer, and it sent the message to Wakanda. Chapter: The ship emerged from the dimensional wormhole, which was over the palace. The ship landed. T'Challa and Solace both carried 2 unconscious Windrunners and were followed by Aza when they disembarked. T'Challa and Solace paused in awe of the technological wonder that was before them. The massive palace changed its shape every 5 seconds and it never returned to a previous shape. In the palace's front courtyard, delegates of different shapes, sizes, hues, sexes, and species from all over Hedis were gathered. In front of the delegates was a female humanoid and she held an infant in her arms. T'Challa threw his Windrunners in front of the delegates and Solace did likewise. T'Challa used the remote, which brought Aza forward. T'Challa surveyed the congregation. "People of Hedis," said T'Challa, and Solace began to translate in 5 languages to the delegates. T'Challa continued, "I am your king T'Challa and this is my assistant Akin Solace." T'Challa extended his right arm towards Solace and T'Challa continued, "Before you are the dismembered bodies of those who sought to ambush me and free your former dictator." T'Challa pointed to Aza, "But fear him no more, and by extension the universe has not to fear the Nida's doctrine of wanton destruction. Today I will put an end to that doctrine, and I will reinstate the Ada doctrine that intellectual populations could freely decide to choose whether to join the Hedis or not. No more coercion and no more genocidal killing of their less intellectual neighbors. Furthermore, I am willing to give the Hedis over to self-governance. Whichever people want to leave they can do so," said T'Challa. "Who amongst you will lead and who will go?" The delegation remained muted. T'Challa unconsciously glanced at Aza, who stared menacingly at the congregation. Aza is to be tried by his peers for the genocide of the Hoff system and the other peoples he killed. "I also want his generals prosecuted," said T'Challa. The delegation was still unmoved by T'Challa's words. The female with the infant slowly approached T'Challa. The female was thin, her eyes were like crystal, her hair black and long, her ears were pointed and she was slightly shorter than T'Challa. When the female opened her mouth to speak, T'Challa noticed that her tongue was multicolored and her canine teeth were long like a vampire. "I am Xanda and wife of Aza. Before Aza is tried, could his son and I be granted a moment with him?" said Xanda, military aristocrat. T'Challa's eyes fell from the sympathetic face of Xanda to the infant she clutched close to her bosom. The infant boy stared back in curiosity while he sucked on his thumb. Chapter: Aza remained in the prisoner container while he spoke with his wife and viewed his son. They were alone on the second floor of the palace while T'Challa and Solace were given a tour of the third and fourth floor. Asa knew that T'Challa had hypersensitive hearing, therefore Asa whispered to his wife. Solace is an old Ada model computer and archaic Talon timeline instruments operate T'Challa's sword. The override and control codes are in the library under ancient operating systems. Find them and pass on the information to G-Nart. Tell him to sabotage the planet Poisoner on the Liko planet and wait for me there. T'Challa is duty-bound to visit the planet and his curiosity will ensure it, said Asa. How did he defeat you? The force field was impenetrable, said Xanda. His sword penetrated the force field. I think the blade is made from the same dark force energy as my force field. On the mental side he had failed his people before and he did not want to repeat it. The battle could have gone either way but his fear of failure gave him the edge. The next time he will lose, said Asa. And you will return to the throne, said Xanda. Go now, said Asa tenderly. Xanda raised the infant to Asa's face and he smiled at his son. Then Xanda left. Asa studied warfare in other cultures and it showed in the collection of weapons, paintings, and artifacts that decorated the walls on the third floor. T'Challa was not impressed. He noticed that Xanda was not with Asa. I want to interview each of the delegates immediately, said T'Challa to one of the servants. Solace, keep an eye on Asa. A servant provided T'Challa with a universal language translator earpiece. The interviews were done in a room on the 6th floor. There were 800 delegates and T'Challa surmised that it would be days until he finished the process. Days that he did not have. He had to return to Wakanda to hunt the creature that Ororo had fought. Unless I lay the groundwork here then return to Wakanda and come back, thought T'Challa. T'Challa told the first 5 interviewees that the discussion would be strictly confidential. However, the meetings were unproductive in T'Challa's opinion. The 5 delegates supported Asa because he protected them from Galactus and he kept order in the civilization. What do you mean by kept order? T'Challa asked each of the delegates, and the answers were the same. There were rival groups within the civilization. They were not violent but the possibility existed. But do you believe that Asa was a cruel ruler? T'Challa had asked. Each of the delegates reluctantly admitted that Asa was a tyrant. Have you ever questioned the Nida's policy? T'Challa asked, and the response was that the policy was in effect for so many years that no one saw a reason to change it. Wakanda had a similar problem, T'Challa said. For centuries the country was isolated from the rest of planet Earth. The first King Bashanga had started the isolation policy because of a vibranium meteor that crashed into the land, and it had mutated the people, flora, and fauna into horrible and amazing creatures. Bashanga thought that if those creatures were allowed to spread to other lands then it would be devastating. So he sealed the borders and it remained that way for centuries. I lost my mother at childbirth and my father died defending Wakanda. I was orphaned at a young age but I also had the freedom to make my own choices. I chose to explore the neighboring lands, which was the rest of Africa. I saw firsthand a world of fear, poverty, strife, and injustice, a stark contrast to Wakanda, and I questioned my country's foreign policy. I met my future wife Ororo, and she was the epitome of all that I saw and something more: hope. I helped her and in so doing I believed I could help the world. I returned to Wakanda and started to make changes. I reached out to other state leaders and started a transformation of the foreign policy. The point is that you have to question the policy and change it if necessary. Despite if it existed for centuries, the Nida's regime policy needs to be changed. Still, the interviewed delegates were adamant that they were satisfied with the status quo and saw no need to alter it. It was the 6th interviewee who made the turning point in T'Challa's opinion. The delegate's name was Idrit, 130 pounds, thin, blue-skinned, a smooth face and large eyes. Did Asa give preferential treatment to any of the groups? Asked T'Challa. The first 5 persons you interviewed received special treatment, replied Idrit. But can I ask you a question? Yes, said T'Challa. What has stopped Wakanda from becoming a lazy people in the technological paradise that they created? Inquired Idrit. T'Challa pondered for a few seconds. It is our military orientation. We are a total defense nation, therefore all our advances were first devised for protection from foreign threats. We then translated the military inventions and understanding into the society and our lifestyles. Why did you ask? Said T'Challa. Because the Hedis are lazy in terms that we let our technology do everything for us. Idrit made his point as he pressed together the 7 fingers on both hands. We have dedicated our lives to research, analysis, experiments, archiving results and presentations. It is a loop, and for what? We help no one but ourselves with the scientific breakthroughs. The Nidas are the only military group and they spend their time developing weapons like your Wakanda does, said Idrit. What about self-government? Would you be interested? Asked T'Challa. If there were guarantees, responded Idrit. Like safety of my family and relatives. That is understandable, thought T'Challa. I will see to it, he said. How can you, realistically speaking? The Hedis are spread over 10 galaxies. The Nidas were able to keep strict control because of fear and the communication network that they created, which was integrated into every technological aspect of the civilization. And that worked because they resided here. Will you be staying? Will there be an occupying force from Wakanda to maintain the order? Asked Idrit. No, I will not be able to stay as long as I want to. I have to return to Wakanda shortly, but I will be back. And I did not bring my army because I believe that diplomacy would be able to do the job, replied T'Challa. Well, for all our sakes I hope you are right, said Idrit. How can I contact you? I am presently in the Krylus system studying a dwarf star, replied Idrit. I will call you once I return from Wakanda, said T'Challa. T'Challa concluded the interview. He scheduled the rest of the interviews for the day after. The fact that there was a lack of dissidents meant that T'Challa could not leave Asa behind. A servant informed T'Challa that an emergency had occurred. The planet Poisoner on Liko was malfunctioning and needed T'Challa's urgent attention. Chapter: The planet Poisoner was a tower that drilled into a planet's core and injected Oxualian energy, which corrupted the planet's life force energy and would effectively kill the planet Eater Galactus if he ever devoured the planet. The Oxualian energy was created by the 5th generation of the Hedis civilization, and the Nidas used the Oxualian energy as a benefit of joining the Hedis. T'Challa was needed in Liko because there was only one planet Poisoner and it was the king's duty to personally deal with any problems with the machine. However, Asa had secretly ordered the construction of another planet Poisoner. T'Challa had no choice than to carry with him Salace and Asa, and they were transported on a hyperspace ship to Liko. T'Challa was informed that the Liko's population had been temporarily relocated to another solar system and only the planet Poisoner operators were on the planet. The operators could not ascertain the cause of the malfunction. T'Challa requested a star map of all the Hedis systems and it was given to him. Chapter: The spaceship landed on a platform, which was in sight of the planet Poisoner. There were 4 other spaceships on the platform. Loud explosions came from the tower. There were strong earthquakes and tremors, which occurred frequently. The tower's architecture reminded T'Challa of a snail shell. A large rectangular door slid open and the chief operator, who floated on a hover platform, met the visitors. The chief operator was an insectoid and he had 2 short antennas on his forehead. There is an imbalance in the mixture of the atoms, said the operator to T'Challa. The visitors boarded the platform and the operator guided it into the tower's door. Gennard and his 10 soldiers were disguised as operators. They watched the chief operator enter the tower with Asa on the platform. Asa spotted Gennard. When the door closed and the platform landed, Asa shouted, "Speak the override codes now." Gennard shouted the codes that overridden Salace's artificial intelligence and left him at the command of the speaker of the codes. T'Challa's sword was disabled in the same manner. Gennard and his soldiers revealed their weapons and they fired at T'Challa. T'Challa flipped out of the way of the laser beams and he hid behind a crate. The crate slowly disintegrated from the rapid laser beam shots. The soldiers began to surround the crate. T'Challa took out his 2 energy blade knives from his uniform, and he charged like a berserk into one of the soldiers. But a strong and concentrated laser beam attack pushed back T'Challa and he took cover behind another crate. "Gennard, transfer command me," said Asa. Gennard shouted, "From now on you will take orders from King Asa." "Salace, release me," shouted Asa. Salace used the remote to open the prisoner container. Asa came out, he seized the remote and crushed it under his heel. "Sword, come to me," said Asa. The sword teleported from T'Challa and it appeared in Asa's hand. "Stop shooting," he said to his soldiers. The soldiers ceased their fire. Asa used his hands to call the soldiers and Gennard to his sides. Then Asa told the chief operator, "Start the self-destruction sequence." The operator complied and he initiated the countdown from the computer attached to his body. The chief operator knew that by destroying the tower the planet would explode. "Salace, kill T'Challa," said Asa. Salace approached the crate and he tossed it with one hand. T'Challa held the knives in a hammer grip and he faced Salace. "Back to the ships," said Asa. The chief operator opened the door and Asa's party left. Asa boarded the spaceship he came on, and he ordered the soldiers to destroy the 3 other spaceships. Asa did not want to give T'Challa any opportunity to escape, and that was the reason Asa chose to trap T'Challa in a situation which he could not survive. Gennard did as he was ordered even though he had imprisoned the operators his soldiers and him had impersonated in the spaceships. Gennard's team left in the 4th ship. Chapter Salace tried to snatch T'Challa's throat. T'Challa stabbed Salace but the wounds healed instantaneously. Salace punched him in the face and the impact floored T'Challa. A tremor interrupted Salace as he lifted his foot to stomp on T'Challa's chest. "I do not want to kill you," thought T'Challa. He sprung up and he raced towards a wall. T'Challa activated the magnets in his boots and he ran up the wall until he reached the ceiling. "Salace, listen to me, fight it," shouted T'Challa. Salace sunk his fingers into the wall until he had a firm grip. Then Salace climbed the wall, at first slowly and faster after he got better grips. T'Challa leapt off the ceiling and landed on his feet. He deactivated the magnets in the boots. Salace landed on the ground and sprinted towards T'Challa. Salace punched at T'Challa's face. T'Challa placed his hands behind his back and dropped on them. He kept his legs slightly off the ground and he used them to swipe Salace's legs. Salace fell to his right, but he regained his balance and he pushed up with his hands. A fissure vent suddenly opened near to T'Challa and he moved out the way while the fissure vent widened. He then punched at Salace. Salace blocked the attack with his right hand and his left hand snaked into T'Challa's throat. T'Challa caught the left hand and he turned the wrist. Then T'Challa used all his strength and he tossed Salace into the fissure vent. Salace held onto T'Challa's right shoulder and pulled. T'Challa felt that his balance slipped. T'Challa and Salace fell into the fissure vent. Salace released T'Challa's shoulder. T'Challa activated the claws in the gloves, and he snatched blindly at the wall. The claws scraped the wall until they sank into it. T'Challa turned his head to find Salace but he was gone. T'Challa climbed up the wall. He reached the top and then he realized that his shoulder was injured. He ignored the pain and he surveyed the area for a means of escape. There was none. Chapter T'Challa broke open the Kimoyo and took out the battery. He joined the battery with the power source from an energy blade knife. He attached both items to a magnet from his boot and placed the makeshift bomb on a wall. T'Challa ruptured the power source and he backed away. The bomb exploded and it left a hole, which T'Challa ran through. The 3 spaceships on the platform were on fire. One of the spaceships was completely destroyed by the fire. Nevertheless, T'Challa broke into the first spaceship. He searched for the escape vessel. The first spaceship's escape vessel was destroyed. The second spaceship's escape vessel was intact. T'Challa slipped into the escape vessel. The vessel was 3-seated. The pilot seat was in front of the 2 other seats. T'Challa stared at the alien control displays. There were 2 discs on the seat armrest. T'Challa removed his gloves and rested his palms on the discs. He felt a surge to his brain. Eject, thought T'Challa. The vessel shook as it detached from the spaceship. Elevate, thought T'Challa. The vessel rose out of the spaceship. Increase altitude and velocity to the maximum, thought T'Challa. The vessel responded and did a barrel spin before it flew at full speed into space. The tower exploded and it started a chain reaction in the planet's core that lasted for 1 minute, then the core exploded. The force of the explosion rocked the vessel as it passed beyond the planet's gravitational field, which would have pulled back the vessel into the explosion. Chapter T'Challa studied the star map. He located the Krylus system and he directed the ship to the solar system. With Soleil gone, the only ally T'Challa had in the Hedus was Idrit. But T'Challa also believed that Idrit's life was in danger because Asa would interrogate all the persons who he had interviewed. Then T'Challa thought about Ororo. T'Challa and Ororo had an understanding when it came to their solo missions that they would not get too worried. However, it was easier said than done. The vessel automatically exited from the hyperdrive. T'Challa consulted the star map and the display screen indicated that an observation space station was in the center of the solar system. T'Challa sent the vessel into hyperdrive and it emerged in the vicinity of the space station. The cylinder-shaped space station was a mile long. The vessel guided itself into the space station's docking bay. The bay was filled with larger ships than the vessel. The crew of the space station hastily came to vessel. They believed that the reason the pilot ignored the hails was because he was injured. T'Challa climbed out the vessel. The crew fell back in astonishment and fear. There were unconfirmed rumors that Asa was once more king. "Is Idrit here?" asked T'Challa. "Yes," answered Idrit as he came to the front. T'Challa seized Idrit by the arm and led him to a private spot where T'Challa related the events on Liko. "My wife got a private message from a friend on the throne world, but I was unsure," said Idrit. Usually that kind of information would be broadcast everywhere through the Nida's system. "How is that system controlled?" asked T'Challa. "Through the king's helmet." "Do you not have it?" asked Idrit. "It is in Wakanda along with Asa's weapon," responded T'Challa. "I believe he will come after you soon," said T'Challa. A crew member came and she informed Idrit that a battle cruiser approached the space station. Chapter What is the number of the crew on a battle cruiser? Asked T'Challa because he wanted to commandeer the battle cruiser. The battle cruiser's engines stood a better chance of getting T'Challa to Earth more quickly than the one on the escape vessel. "About 22, replied Idrit. "Do you have weapons?" inquired T'Challa. "No," replied Idrit. "All right, you and your crew will move to a safe." T'Challa, "The crew and I are in the middle of an experiment with the star. We have slowly been shutting it down to restart it. If we leave it at this crucial stage, then," said Idrit, flabbergasted, "Asa will be going to Wakanda. I have to either reach there before him or meet him there. But I have to get that battle cruiser, said T'Challa. There has to be another way, said Idrit. Can the station survive a nova? Asked T'Challa. I am not sure. It depends on the shields, answered Idrit. T'Challa weighed the pros and cons and then he said, I will try to keep the damage to a minimum. Chapter The battle cruiser docked in the bay. T'Challa was concealed in an oversized spacesuit next to Idrit. The door to the battle cruiser opened, the humanoid captain and 2 humanoid lieutenants alighted. The captain held out his palm and a holographic image of Aza's face appeared. Aza was in the palace. He had taken a break from torturing the second delegate interviewed by T'Challa as Xanda had indicated. Aza wanted to know what was spoken in the meeting and which side the delegate was on. The delegate had pleaded that he was on Aza's side. Aza did not believe the delegate and showed the delegate's family on a monitor. Aza said that the family was his prisoners and threatened to murder the delegate's youngest son. The message from the captain that he had arrived at Idrit's space station interrupted Aza. Aza left the delegate strapped to a chair. Aza turned on the military communication device. Idrit, you are under arrest for suspicion of treason. You and your family will be brought to the palace at once, Aza said, and he terminated the link. Aza returned to the delegate who pleaded for mercy. Aza took T'Challa's sword, that had already tasted the blood of the first delegate, and he drove it into the delegate's chest. Kill the family, Aza said to the person on the other end of the monitor feed. As instructed, Idrit stepped away from the space suit, and he hid behind a crate that was specifically placed there. T'Challa ripped out the spacesuit with his claws and he attacked the 3 soldiers. He slashed their throats, then he proceeded into the battle cruiser. The communications officer on the battle cruiser contacted Aza and transmitted footage of T'Challa's rampage. He survived, thought Aza, and then he shouted the words. Xanda heard him and she came with her son from the next room. What is it? She asked. T'Challa is alive. I am going to Wakanda to get my helmet and lance, said Aza. Then he stared at his son. My son's helmet and lance. Aza kissed his son's forehead. Aza took a new dark force field controller and T'Challa's sword, then he departed in a new spaceship into a hyperdimension for Wakanda. T'Challa caught his breath as he stared at the last soldier he killed who had hidden in a cabinet, but T'Challa's keen sense of smell found the soldier. He had to kill the soldier since a prisoner would have slowed him down and endangered Idrit. T'Challa emerged from the battle cruiser. Idrit, you need to come with me to Wakanda. Not without my family and my crew, said Idrit while he observed the blood-covered T'Challa. Idrit had never killed an organism in his life, so what he witnessed from T'Challa was repulsive to Idrit. Crew? Asked T'Challa while he smelt the hot metal from his uniform that was caused by the soldiers' laser fire. They will be persecuted for being my associates, said Idrit. All right, but we leave now. We will have to leave the star. Hopefully they will believe that you perished in the destruction, said T'Challa. Your crew will follow in the other ships. Chapter Presently, the battle cruiser exited hyperspace near the moon and 6 other ships followed out of the hyperspace. A hail came from the Sentient Worlds Observation and Response Department space station, the Peak 2. T'Challa answered the hail. Moments later, Agent Brand spoke with T'Challa, who navigated the cruiser towards Wakanda. President T'Challa, your entourage cannot enter Earth without permission, said Agent Brand. The people in the other ships are fleeing possible political persecution. I advise that you allow them safe haven at your space station for the time being, said T'Challa. I spoke to your wife about 2 minutes ago. She was attending to an emergency, said Brand. What kind of emergency? The missing creature or Aza? Thought T'Challa. Chapter Aza left his spaceship in the dimension route, and he teleported to Wakanda. He followed a silent beacon that came from the helmet and lance. The beacon led Asa to a military facility that was guarded by bipedal robots. Asa teleported into the room where his items were kept. He fought off 10 robot guards. The robots triggered an alarm. Asa placed the helmet on his head. Then his instincts told him that an opponent was nearby. Asa activated his dark force field and grabbed the lance. He then waited. Ororo came through the door. She viewed the destroyed robots with disgust. Then she focused on Asa and T'Challa's sword. Ororo feared the worst. From what I heard, you were pivotal in shaping T'Challa's character. I wonder what he will become once he loses you? Only one way to find out, said Asa. T'Challa is alive, thought Ororo. Chapter Ororo recognized that the peculiar energy pattern around Asa was the force field. Naturally, Ororo manipulated all forms of energy, but the force field was odd. She could not connect to it. Moreover, Asa had the ability to teleport in an instant. I have to be creative, thought Ororo. She summoned a thick mist between her and Asa. Then Ororo used all the power of the Earth's magnetic force to send her through the roof as she cleared a path with lightning. That same instant Asa had teleported from his spot to where Ororo had stood, and Asa slashed wildly with T'Challa's sword. Asa realized that Ororo had disappeared. He heard a noise from above and he stared upward at the night sky. Then Asa noticed that the force field had been changing. Small strange patterns created by Ororo grew all over the force field. Unknown to Asa, the patterns seeped into the tiniest of spaces that were made when the dark force blade protruded the dark force field. Once inside of the force field, the patterns transformed into charged electrons. The electrons exploded and caused an electrical power surge that attacked Asa's body. The surge shorted out the force field and the helmet. Asa grimaced as he withstood the extreme pain. Ororo then summoned plasma energy in her hands, and she directed the raw energy down into the hole and onto Asa. Asa mentally fought through the pain, and he leapt out of the path of the attack. However, the force of the plasma attack flung Asa through the wall and he landed outside of the building. Asa struggled to stand and then he realized that he had not T'Challa's sword. However, the force field controller began to work and it shielded Asa from the flurry of lightning bolts that came down on him. Asa smelt the odor of his burnt flesh. His entire body pained and his vision was poor. He struggled to find his balance like a drunkard. Asa struck his lance in the ground and he leaned on it. The lightning bolts increased in ferocity, but Asa merely watched the bright lights as he gathered his breath. He tried to mentally access the teleporter in his helmet, but it was still offline. Chapter Wakandan warplanes threatened to down the battle cruiser. T'Challa identified himself and gave his air clearance number. He then called Ororo over their personal communicators. "Ororo, where are you?" asked T'Challa. "I am at the Naya facility and Asa is here," said Ororo. T'Challa steered the battle cruiser westward and within seconds he was over the Naya facility. T'Challa put the cruiser in hover mode. "Take over," T'Challa told Idrit. Idrit took control of the ship while T'Challa rushed to the main door. T'Challa opened the door and then he made a high-altitude low-opening jump. Ororo caught T'Challa with a strong upper wind draft, which cradled T'Challa's fall and he landed on the roof of the building. He then leapt off and landed in front of Asa. Chapter Ororo floated above both Asa and T'Challa. Ororo kept the lightning barrage on Asa. T'Challa spotted his sword on the ground. "I have to chance it," thought T'Challa. He dived at the sword and gathered it. T'Challa leapt like a panther towards Asa, and he stabbed the alien through the chest. The lightning bolts bombarded T'Challa and he pitched back from Asa. T'Challa's stunned body skated along the ground until it lost momentum. Ororo stopped the lightning. She flew at T'Challa, who trembled from the electrical shock. Ororo peeled back the mask. T'Challa barely made out Ororo's face. Then T'Challa felt the handle of the sword in his hand and he remembered Asa. "Is he dead?" asked T'Challa. Ororo stared at Asa's lifeless body, which had slumped onto the ground. "Yes," replied Ororo. Chapter T'Challa returned to the Hedis with the political refugees and Asa's body. T'Challa had cut the force field controller from Asa's body so he could be handled properly. Respectfully, T'Challa gave the lance over to Xanda. "I hope your son will not need it," said T'Challa. Xanda took the lance and she left the palace. T'Challa announced that he still wanted Hedis self-governance and the prosecution of the Hedis generals involved in mass murders. However, Idrit warned T'Challa that if self-governance and a peaceful Hedis was to be a reality, it needed T'Challa's effective leadership and Idrit would need protection from Wakanda. "I will protect you," said T'Challa. "No. That is not what I mean. The country Wakanda has to be committed to oversee the transition no matter who is in power," said Idrit. "This is a crucial junction in the Hedis civilization because we are the ancestors of the Celestials." "How is that possible, when the Celestials have existed for centuries?" inquired T'Challa. "I have to show you something," said Idrit. Chapter The name of the building was pronounced Jack Kirby. Inside the building rested the 15,000 feet long, gigantic, and decapitated body of a Celestial. Idrit related the story of the dead Celestial. The Celestial was the first, the one above all, whom was the leader of the Celestials. The Celestial came to Asa's great-grandfather Rza and tried to stop the further growth of the Hedis. At first Rza believed that the Celestial was angry that the Hedis had killed intelligent populations who were being studied and experimented on by the Celestials. But the one above all stated that the Hedis might be his race's ancestors. The Celestials believed that they were constructed and a great amount of collected knowledge was placed in them. They escaped from a dimension millions of years in the future and they followed cryptic memories that led them to our universe. They assumed that a people from our universe created them and they want to stop it because the Celestials suffer from ennui and depression. So if they kill their creators, it will prevent the life that they suffer. They could not wait for intellectual evolution to reveal their creators, so they interfered with it to quicken the process, said T'Challa. Correct. When they saw the intellectual level of the Hedis, the one above all thought he had found the creators and he attacked us. Rza killed him in space and brought the body back here, said Idrit. What did he use to kill the Celestial? Asked T'Challa. The lance that you gave to Xanda, answered Idrit. T'Challa sighed for the mistake he had made. The Celestials have not bothered us since then. But with the Hedis gone, it is possible that they may strike, said Idrit. That will be another Holocaust, said T'Challa. And you need a superpower nation of warriors to deter that threat, said T'Challa as he realized the necessity of Wakanda to Hedis stability. Led by the man and the woman who killed the Hedis king, said Idrit. That will be a problem, thought T'Challa, since Ororo and I are to leave office in a few months. Ororo had told T'Challa of the destruction of the OPTM political party hierarchy that had crippled the party before they had elected a new political leader, and that had left T'Challa and Ororo in presidential office until the general elections. Chapter T'Challa's sword returned to his control since Asa had died, and T'Challa removed the override programming while he told Ororo of the events in the Hedis. Then Ororo told her story about the destroyed climate change regulator and her battle with the insane superhuman. And the creature and one of his associates have revealed themselves to the public, said Ororo, and she handed T'Challa Nginda's and Slay's files. They have a political party. Nginda is running for president and he is a hardline isolationist with regards to the foreign policy. T'Challa sucked his teeth because Nginda and Slay were either the leaders of a conspiracy or a part of a wider agenda. T'Challa was disappointed that he had not spoken to Mookie about the conspiracy before he had passed away. They want to take us back 100 years. No allies and no foreign relations, just total isolation, said T'Challa. I am also running for president, said Ororo. The world needs Wakanda's intervention, especially in climate change control. I agree, and I need to be in office to ensure that the Hedis are protected, said T'Challa. Then we will run a joint campaign, said Ororo. Yes, said T'Challa. Besides, it is better that the people mandate us to help others. But it is how to convince them to do so. Chapter Xanda along with her son arrived on the planet Teku, which revolved around its sun 3 times faster than any other planet in the solar system. She brought with her a youth preservation machine that she would use on herself while the planet aged her son quickly into an adult who would one day avenge his father's death.